Tibettv. Our today's guest for the In Conversation with Tibettv is an experienced public policy advisor with expertise in development, biodiversity, and resource management policy. He is an author and a cancer survivor. He has submitted numerous reports and submissions, a large number of them on devastating consequences of mining in Tibet. Let us welcome Gabriel Lafitte.
Thank you, Chimila.
So, Gabriel, when we talk about China's oppression in Tibet, violations of human rights is inextricably connected with abuse of Tibet's ecology. China forcing thousands of Tibetan nomads off their ancestral lands, illegal mining, massive damming projects in Tibet. They are, all of these and much more lead to arresting and torturing of Tibetan environmental activists. Out of 157 Tibetans who have self-immolated, a considerable number of them are from a nomadic community. So before we discuss these abuse of ecological constructs in Tibet, could you give a brief overview of the impacts of China's developmental policies in Tibet?
Well, that's covering over 70 years in which China's policies have changed. As they become richer, they become greedier, and they use more and more technology, and they need more and more resources for their own industries. So it has changed over the years. Tibetans sometimes assume that the very name that China gives to Tibet, to central Tibet, Xizang, which can be translated as treasure house of the West, means that China has exploited the minerals and the other natural riches of Tibet mercilessly for 70 years. But I think in reality, it's only in recent years that it's scaled up to much more intensive exploitation. In the past, it was more small scale, but often in terms of environmental impact, very serious. If we go back to the 1980s, when there were gold miners, just simply, poor Chinese individuals who had no land of their own and would come to Tibet and dig up the riverbeds all over Tibet to just find a few little specks of gold. Maybe most of them never made a fortune. Maybe they never found that much gold, but they did incredible damage to the rivers by digging them up. So I'm not saying that small scale is insignificant, but what I do think we need to look at really is the more recent intensification of extraction from Tibet, because the mining industry talks about extraction enclaves, areas of very intensive investment in extracting not just a little bit of gold from the surface, but if the gold on the surface is an indication that there's a lot more gold underground, then these days China wants to extract it all. And if that means digging, deep holes and using lots of expensive technology and equipment to extract it all, then that's what they are trying to do these days.
You were talking about the same thing in your article. The number of large-scale mines in Tibet has been pretty low until recent times, and now the actual extraction in Tibet has begun, and the Anthropocene age of acceleration includes Tibet. So that's where you have substantiated your argument. Maybe you would like to give us a few examples of what is happening right now.
Well, if you go to a Chinese geology map of deposits, it looks really, really scary. And in fact, I think such a map will be published soon. And what it shows is that right across China, the total number of mineral deposits discovered by Chinese geologists is almost 6,000 deposits. Now, given that the Tibetan Plateau is 1/4 of the total territory claimed by China. A huge number of those deposits, thousands, are in Tibet. But does that mean they are being mined? It doesn't. There is a big difference between some initial intimation that there might be a deposit and actually mining. There are many, many steps in between, and they are technical, geological, but they are also social, and above all, they are political and economic. And it's all too easy to frighten, scare Tibetans into believing that the Chinese are in a rapacious and predatory way pillaging, raping and looting and robbing Tibet of its natural resource endowment, which of course is incredibly painful to Tibetans because, as the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity recognizes, local communities with local traditions of preserving landscapes are far and away the most effective way of protecting biodiversity. So when Tibetans say that, it is not good to dig up this mountain next to where we live because there is a local god who will get very upset and angry, and he will cause earthquakes or landslides or storms or some disaster. And, in the modern world, people say, this is just a superstition. This is just some, ridiculous local belief. But it works. It's effective. And that's why it's so painful for Tibetan villagers, Tibetan nomads to be unable to prevent what is now increasingly becoming really large-scale, intensive extraction.
You have talked about resource nationalism. What is resource nationalism?
China's resource nationalism means that China, until recently, was not emphasizing resource nationalism in the sense that they were quite comfortable with obtaining whatever raw materials they need from all over the world. But now that the world is changing, now that it looks like almost like a new Cold War, the Chinese are so fearful and worried that the world is increasingly risky. They look at the enormous distance across the oceans between where they can obtain oil, where they can obtain cobalt, copper, lithium that is suitable for use in electric vehicle batteries. Until very recently, they've been very comfortable with extracting the lithium, for example, from Chile, Argentina, Bolivia in South America, in extracting copper from Peru and Congo in Africa. But then the semi-processed minerals have to travel thousands of kilometers across the oceans, both across the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean, South China Sea, before they reach the Chinese coastal ports where all the factories are. Now, in today's world, the Chinese are fearful that some other power could interrupt this supply. So now they are becoming much more resource nationalists, saying that we must intensify the exploitation of Tibet because we have absolute control over Tibet, and this cannot be interrupted by any other power. So if you look at a map that shows all of the mineral deposits in Tibet, there are just surrounding Lhasa, within 200 kilometers of Lhasa, at least 30, maybe 40 major deposits, what the Chinese call super large deposits that contain at least 3 or 4 minerals that are very profitable to extract. In terms of quantity, the biggest is copper, but there is also, in the same deposits, molybdenum, which is very useful in a lot of high technology applications, gold and silver. And everybody knows that gold and silver are very valuable. They are often at the top of the deposits for geological reasons, so they can be quick to extract. So even if establishing a mine that is capable of digging a hole deep enough to extract the entire deposit, you must invest literally billions of dollars in all the infrastructure, the technology, the machinery, the processing plants, the crushers, etc. But it's worth doing from a Chinese viewpoint. So that's really what resource nationalism, China's resource nationalism, means, that it is now focused much more strongly than in the past on Tibet's natural endowment.
Right. So you have talked about Tibet as an emerging, source, China's emerging source of its two key critical minerals, that is copper and lithium, and the announcement of Chulong mining site in Tibet to become the location of world's number one or the biggest copper mining site. What does it mean for China to achieve this dominance over copper production commodity chain?
China already dominates the processing of nearly all minerals and the production of metal, and using the metal to create the new technologies that everybody says will be needed so that the world can move on from the fossil fuel era. What a lot of people haven't fully realized is that if we stop using coal and oil and instead turn to electric vehicles, lithium batteries, hydropower, solar power, wind power, all of those technologies require huge amounts of lithium and especially copper. It means a very substantial increase in extraction, processing, refining, smelting, and manufacturing on that basis. And most of China's lithium is in Tibet, and all these long chain, and almost you might say an archipelago of copper deposits that go all the way from Pangong-tso in Upper Tibet, in Ngari, right across on the north side of the Yarong-Tsangpo, past Lhasa, and really going into Kham, into eastern Tibet. It's entirely, to use a geological term, a metallogenic zone, meaning it's given birth to metals. It's actually got a very human sort of inner meaning, you might say. And this is what China is now focused on. They see their future very much as intensified, accelerated, Anthropocene extraction from Tibet, because they see China's economic future as the dominant world supplier of the new technologies of electric vehicle, the so-called green economy, which when you look at it is not all that green, and especially when it comes to Tibet. In fact, I wonder whether in future years we will regret making a rather simple assumption that, okay, we must get rid of coal and oil, which is absolutely true, but did we make a very simplistic assumption that by getting rid of coal and oil and instead turning to copper and lithium, that somehow this is all green and wonderful and clean and has no impact? Well, it will reduce carbon emissions, there's no doubt about that, although actually the mining and the processing and the refining and smelting of copper and lithium do have significant emissions, but that's maybe not the major story, but they have all sorts of other ecological, environmental impacts, and it will impact particularly on the Tibetan Plateau. So is it skillful to get rid of one technology that threatens the climate of the planet, only to turn to another technology that actually we will slowly realise, it might take us decades, also can be quite harmful, or even very harmful, to not only to Tibet, but to the world generally, and for lots of reasons. One major reason is that even in the richest copper deposit in the world, the amount of copper in the rock is at the most 2%. So 98% is waste. What do you do with that 98%? Where do you dump it? Because it has no value economically. Most of the processing has to be done at the mine in Tibet. And often the copper mines are close to the top of mountains. The new mines around Lhasa are very often at an altitude of 5,000 meters. That means permafrost. That means that it's very difficult to operate a mine and a processing plant and maintain a workforce 12 months of the year, but that's their plan. Then you are generating literally millions of tons of waste every year. Again, if you look at their plans, their projections about the rate and the scale of extraction that they are actually planning, and it's on that basis that they boast that they are building the biggest copper mines in the world. Frankly, I think their boast is exaggerated, but that's what they're saying. What do you do with all the waste? They say that it's possible to turn this waste, which is like a sort of a muddy, slightly liquid mixture of rock, powdered rocks has been crushed to powder, and chemicals and water, and you must build a big dam to contain it, otherwise it will flow downhill. It's near the top of a mountain and into the rivers, and it's full of toxic metals, metals that the human body is not capable of eliminating, because in nature we are not exposed to these toxic metals. So they can be very dangerous. So if you put this muddy slurry into a waste dam, a tailings dam is the term that the mining industry uses, how can we guarantee that the dam will never break, that there will not be an earthquake or a landslide or some other natural disaster? And after all, again, if you look at the actual mining extraction plans, usually they plan for the mine to have a life cycle of maybe 20, maximum 30 years. So what they're really saying is that over the next 30 years, we will dig out all of the extractable copper, gold, silver, molybdenum, etc. And then we'll go. So the mining company that is investing heavily today, in 30 years, will be gone. Yeah. But the wastes will remain. The wastes will remain forever. Who will look after them? Who will maintain them? who will prevent disasters? Is it even possible to prevent disasters? The Chinese company has already made its profits. It's packed up and it's gone. They say that they have invented a new technology which can solve this problem and can turn the wastes, the powdered rock, back into rock. Will it work? The only way they can do that is if they import from China other industrial wastes, specifically fly ash, which is the waste product from coal-fired power stations that normally just goes up the chimney and into the air. And if you can capture the tiny particles in the fly ash and then truck them into Tibet and mix it with the wastes from the mine, and theoretically that will turn into concrete. But will it work? Will it work at permafrost temperatures? Will it turn into hard rock when the ground is already frozen? China says, oh, this is green technology, we will do green mining, everything will be wonderful, there will be no difficulties.
So Gabriel, you have briefly talked about the impact of mining in Tibet, and Tibet being the water tower of Asia, the rivers of the Tibetan plateau provide water to over 2 billion people downstream. What would be the impact on these people in the downstream of mining in Tibet?
Yeah, there are good reasons for the people in many countries downstream to worry about what is happening upstream, and also to understand that there are deep connections between upstream and downstream. In the wider world, when we talk about upstream, downstream, or to use the political jargon, upper riparian and lower riparian, normally it's the upper riparian who holds the power. And in fact, China does feel that it does have power over the lower riparian countries, especially on the Mekong and also on the Brahmaputra, that is the Zachu and Yalung Sangpo. And yet, who are the upper riparians in this situation? It's the Tibetans, and yet they are powerless. Powerless to protect their own rivers, to protect the purity of their waters. If there is a major pollution incident, fortunately we do have good, solid scientific record of the waters of all of the major rivers of Tibet, with a precise analysis of their chemical composition, which was done by European scientists from Finland before the big mines started. This was done several years ago. So, if there is some terribly disastrous, catastrophic incident, and China might say, oh yes, but in Tibet, these rivers naturally have a certain level of toxic metals, and luckily we will have as a reference point this research done by scientists from Finland who can show what is the natural flow of the rivers, what is the chemical composition of the rivers. So we'll be able to check whether any Chinese claims are actually accurate.
Why is mining more dangerous and riskier in Tibet than anywhere else?
There have been many accidents, including major ones in which many of the mine workers were killed. In just one incident at Gyama in 2013, I think it was. I think 83 miners were killed. Yes. So I mean, Tibet geologically is a young land. The land is naturally in motion. It's unstable. Anything can happen, as Tibetans know. I mean, there are reasons why Tibetans believe there are subterranean, underground gods of the lakes, of the mountains, of the landscapes. It is a living landscape. And we are, as climate change accelerates, we are seeing more and more glaciers simply just collapsing very suddenly and dramatically, and sliding downhill into rivers, blocking rivers, causing floods, major earthquakes, all sorts of things can and do happen in Tibet. Mining is more than extraction, and especially if the minerals being mined are only a small fraction of the total amount of rock that has to be extracted. So the processing that has to happen at the mine is also very environmentally risky. It depends on the mineral, it depends on the processing method, but very often it involves a chemical process in which you have to immerse the rock that is being crushed to powder in sulfuric acid to concentrate it. Sometimes it has to be done at a very high temperature, like 1,000 degrees centigrade, which is like roasting the rock, which in turn requires a lot of energy. So where does the energy come from? In turn, you have to build a hydro dam to provide the electricity and the copper to extract more copper. And so the impacts multiply. The more closely you look at the whole production process, you just see more and more and more impacts. Then, at the mine, the end of this story is you have produced what they call a concentrate. So instead of it having 2% copper, it now has 23% copper. But 23% means that there is still another 77% that is going to be waste. But that mix of waste and copper and molybdenum, gold and silver has to be taken somewhere else. Usually 1,200 to 2,000 kilometers away to a smelter. And depending on the location of the mine, maybe that can be taken by rail, but usually it's taken by truck because the mines are in quite remote locations where there's no railway. So again, we have to consider the carbon emissions of trucking, endless convoys of trucks constantly going to a distant smelter, burning diesel, fossil fuel that's emitting. So here's the ultimate irony. We are supposedly producing a green economy
Decarbonized world.
for a decarbonised world, and yet in reality, whether it's copper from Peru that has to go to China across the Pacific in ships that are burning fossil fuel, whether it's copper that's extracted from Congo that has to go by rail across Zambia to Mozambique and then go all the way across the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea, again burning fossil fuel, or whether it's extracted from somewhere around Lhasa or another one of the new mines at a very big one at Yulong, which is between Jomda and Derke, almost on the border of Tibet Autonomous Region with Sichuan. Either way, we are burning a lot of fossil fuel. So when you add up all of these, and then of course in order to extract the pure copper, metal, gold, silver and molybdenum, or the same goes for lithium, again that too is highly energy intensive. So actually when you add up all these impacts, it's actually very questionable whether we're really overall, if we take a more comprehensive approach, are we really making much progress? Yes, in a very narrow sense, we are to some extent decarbonising, but if that is our only objective and we don't care about anything else, that's very narrow. That's not how the real world works. Everything in reality is connected to everything else, which the Tibetan Buddhist Lamas always tell us.
Right. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you so much for taking your time out for this interview. Thank you. It was an honor having you with us.
Thank you, Jimila. Really good questions. I hope my answers were not too complicated.
No, thank you so much. Our audience will love them. So that was our today's guest, Gabriel Lafitte, a researcher based in Australia but has spent many years of his life living with Tibetans in Tibet and in exile. To read more of Gabriel's research on mining menace in Tibet, please visit www.rukor.org. Thank you for watching Tibettv.